The air in the Christie's auction hall in Shanghai is engineered to absorb everything but two sounds: the crack of the auctioneer's gavel and the whisper of money. Tonight, both were singing a hymn in honor of Liang. He sat in the front row, a young god in a perfectly tailored suit, a half-smile playing on his lips like a careless yet confident stroke of calligraphy. The stage lights reflected off his polished hair and, more importantly, off the masterpiece rotating on a black velvet pedestal at the center of the stage. Phoenix Reborn. It was a piece of white jade with ethereal green veins, carved into the form of a phoenix rising from flames. Every feather, every lick of fire, was so vividly rendered that one could almost hear the rush of wind and feel the heat. The press had called it the rebirth of modern jade sculpture. They called Liang the Hand of God. I called him by the name I had given him 15 years ago, in a small, dusty workshop in Suzhou, a name he would now never acknowledge. I sat in a dark corner at the back, dressed in coarse, indigo-dyed cotton, a discordant note in a symphony of silk and diamonds. No one paid me any mind. In this world, invisibility is a form of armor. I had worn it for 15 years. 100 million, the auctioneer cried out, his voice cracking with excitement. The entire hall held its breath. Liang gave a slight nod, a gesture of feigned modesty he had practiced in the mirror hundreds of times. He knew his value, or at least, the value he had manufactured. 100 million, going once. I looked at the phoenix. I knew it better than the man who had copied it. I knew the origin of every cut, the curve of every feather on the tip of the right wing, where, under 20 times magnification, one would find a nearly invisible micro-fissure, a flaw as fine as a human hair, a flaw born of haste, a flaw born of talent without virtue. 100 million, going twice. This was the moment. Patience, like polishing jade, is the process of removing the superfluous until only the core remains. My plan had been polished for 15 years. It was time to see if it was sharp enough. I raised my paddle. Number 333, an unremarkable number. A hush fell over the room. The auctioneer squinted. All eyes turned toward me, not with admiration, but with confusion. They saw a provincial old man, not a tycoon. "Sir, are you certain?" 120 million, I said, my voice calm, just loud enough for the overhead microphones to catch. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Liang turned around. For the first time that evening, the smile froze on his face. Our eyes met across the sea of heads. For a moment he didn't see an old man. He saw a ghost. The ghost of the old workshop, of the smell of raw jade, of the teachings he had discarded. Panic flickered in his eyes before being masked by contempt. He thought this was a joke, a pathetic attempt at disruption by a defeated man. He signaled to a man beside him, a wealthy collector. The man raised his paddle. 130 million. 150, I said immediately, without hesitation. The auction was now between the two of us. Money was no longer the measure. It had become the weapon. The room was now an arena, and they were watching a duel between a gladiator in golden armor and an old farmer with a hoe. They did not know that the very ground beneath the gladiator's feet had once belonged to that farmer. 200 million, Liang's man shouted, his voice now tinged with strain. Liang looked at me, his eyes challenging. "What do you have to fight me with?" I said nothing. I simply raised my paddle, then held up 2 fingers. 300. 300 million renminbi? The auctioneer stammered, turning to the organizers for confirmation. A woman in an evening gown nodded vigorously, her eyes gleaming with the thought of her commission. Liang was speechless. His smile had vanished. He knew I didn't have that kind of money. He knew my past, but he didn't know my past 15 years. 300 million. Going once, going twice. The auctioneer looked toward my rival. The man looked at Liang, and Liang shook his head, an involuntary gesture. 300 million. Sold to bidder number 333. The room erupted in applause, not for the art, but for the sheer madness of it. I stood up and walked slowly to the stage, ignoring the camera flashes that exploded like lightning. Liang was also standing there, his face ashen. "Master," he whispered, a word I had not heard from his lips in 15 years. "What? What are you doing here?" "I came to take back what is mine," I said, my voice steady. I didn't look at him anymore. I walked to the pedestal and lifted Phoenix Reborn. It was cool and heavy in my hands, a familiar weight. I could feel the soul I had breathed into the design and the hollowness of his execution. "A masterpiece," the auctioneer exclaimed beside me. "You have a truly discerning eye, sir." "Indeed," I said. I do. And then, before the lenses of dozens of news agencies, before the eyes of the entire art world, before Xiang's face, which was slowly contorting in horror, I raised the jade high. And I let it go. The shattering sound was sharp and cold. It silenced every applause, every whisper. The 300 million yuan jade sculpture broke into 100 pieces on the marble floor, a spray of green and white. The silence that followed was more deafening than the crash. It was a silence of sacrilege, of the unthinkable. I turned back to look at Xiang. The color had drained from his face. He looked as if his own soul had just been shattered. I bent down and picked up the largest fragment, the one with the feather I knew so well. I held it out to him. I told you, I said, my voice clear, echoing in the dead silence. A fake is not worth a single coin. And you, Xiang, you have forgotten the first lesson. A small crack, no matter how well hidden, will eventually destroy the entire stone. It was not an accusation. It was a diagnosis. And tonight was only the beginning of the treatment. Chaos erupted like a disturbed hive. Security guards rushed the stage, wealthy women screamed, and journalists shoved forward, their cameras like hungry eyes devouring every broken piece of the tragedy. At the center of the storm I stood still. So did Xiang, but his stillness was that of a statue struck by lightning. He stared at the jade fragments, his lips moving without sound. He wasn't seeing the pieces. He was seeing his empire, his reputation, the entire life he had built on a lie, now lying shattered at my feet. A Christie's manager ran up to me, his face crimson with anger and panic. You, what have you done? Do you have any idea what you've destroyed? I know very well, I replied, not looking at him, but directly at Xiang. I have destroyed a falsehood. I turned and walked off the stage, parting a path through the stunned crowd. No one stopped me. The audacity of my action had created a void around me, a buffer of sheer astonishment. As I stepped out through the grand doors, the cold Shanghai air rushed in, carrying the damp smell of the Huangpu River. It was like a slap in the face, waking me from a 15-year dream. The night wind whipped the hem of my coat, and in its whistle, I heard the echo of a distant time. 15 years ago, the air in my Suzhou workshop did not smell of the river, but of stone and water, the smell of wet jade dust, of polishing machine oil, and of the strong pu'er tea I brewed every morning. Xiang was only 18 then, a lanky youth with bright, burning eyes and hands that seemed born to hold a carving knife. He was an orphan I had taken in from a remote village, after seeing him use a piece of broken pottery to carve the image of a carp onto a brick. I had seen in him not just talent, but an innate connection to the soul of the stone. I taught him everything I knew. I taught him how to listen to a raw block of jade to know what it wanted to become. I taught him the difference between skill and virtue. Skill could create a beautiful object, but only virtue could breathe life into it. Virtue was patience, respect for the material, the understanding that the artist is not a creator, but a discoverer of the beauty already hidden within. Xiang learned quickly, too quickly. His talent was like a wildfire, brilliant but dangerous. He lacked tranquility. He wanted to conquer the jade, not listen to it. He saw his works as stepping stones to fame, not as spiritual children. I tried to guide him, telling him that haste was the enemy of perfection. Jade needs time. Xiang, I often said, millions of years to form, and you must spend a lifetime to understand it. He would nod, but in his eyes I saw impatience. He saw the world outside changing, young artists rising to fame through marketing gimmicks, glamorous auctions. My small workshop became a cage to him. And then, I began to design Phoenix Reborn. It was to be my life's masterpiece, a meditation on destruction and rebirth, on beauty sprouting from ashes. I spent 3 years just on the sketches, studying every line. Xiang was the only one I showed them to. I had hoped that its complexity and depth would teach him the final lesson of patience. I was wrong. It only showed him a shortcut. One morning, I arrived at the workshop to find my workbench empty. All the designs were gone. So was Xiang. He left only a note. Master, your time is over. The world needs things that are new, faster, more brilliant. I will give them that. 2 months later, the news began to spread. A new carving prodigy had appeared, Xiang. He debuted with a masterpiece called Phoenix Reborn, hailed as a revolution. At the same time, rumors about me began to circulate. That Lao Lin's talent had dried up. That he was jealous of his student. That his methods were obsolete, no longer relevant to the market. The patrons who had commissioned my work began to cancel. The art world turned its back. Xiang, with a single stroke, had not only stolen my work, but it also severed my life. I did not crumble, I simply fell silent. Silence is also a language. In that silence I closed the workshop, sold my tools, and left Suzhou. Everyone thought I had retreated in shame. They didn't know I was simply trading one set of tools for another. Instead of carving knives, I began to use geological maps. Instead of polishing jade, I began to analyze soil samples. The blare of a car horn pulled me back to the Shanghai present. I was standing in front of a luxury hotel where I had rented a penthouse suite. The drama at the auction house was over. The real drama, the drama of truth, was just beginning. My penthouse suite at the Bund Hotel was nothing like the old workshop. Here, everything was clean, minimalist, and cold. Stark white walls, metal and glass furniture, and a massive window overlooking the glittering skyline of Pudong. The contrast was intentional. The old workshop was where I created beauty from the chaos of stone and dust. This place was where I would create order from the chaos of information. I took off my coarse cotton jacket, revealing the well-tailored gray suit underneath. The provincial old man was just a role, a rough exterior to conceal the polished jade within. 15 years of silence had not been 15 years of suffering. They had been 15 years of preparation. When Xiang took my designs, he took my artistic soul. But he forgot that to create that art, I had to understand the material. I was not just an artisan, I was an amateur geologist. I knew how to look at a mountain and guess where the precious jade veins were hidden. That knowledge, it turned out, was more valuable than nimble fingers. I traveled to the remote regions of Xinjiang and Yunnan, not to find jade, but to find other things. I used my meager savings to buy tracts of land that people dismissed as barren. But I knew that beneath that barren topsoil lay deposits of rare earth elements, the minerals the modern tech world craved. When the smartphone and electric vehicle industries exploded, my worthless plots of land became gold mines. I did not become rich. I became independent. Financial independence is the purest form of freedom. I sat down at the glass desk and opened my laptop. On the screen was a complex web of information I had woven over the years. It wasn't a single dossier, but an ecosystem of facts. The financial statements of Xiang Jade, customs records of raw jade imports, anonymous interviews with squeezed suppliers, leaked emails. Each piece was a small truth, harmless on its own. But when woven together, they painted a complete picture of an empire built on lies, exploitation, and shortcuts. Xiang was brilliant at creating a glittering facade, but he was careless about hiding the cracks within. My phone rang. An unknown number, I answered. "Is this Mr. Lao Lin?" The voice of a young woman, sharp and professional. "My name is Han Wei, a reporter for the Financial and Economic Times." "Hello, Miss Han. What happened at Christie's tonight?" "It's unbelievable. All of Shanghai is buzzing. Everyone wants to know, why did you do it? Some say you're mad. Others say it was a performance. Can you give us a comment?" "The truth needs no comment, Miss Han. It only needs to be revealed," I said. "I will send you an email. In it, you will find a technical analysis of the jade structure. Take it to a trustworthy expert appraiser. They will understand." "Is that all, sir?" she asked, sounding disappointed at the lack of a sensational story. "The truth is rarely loud, but it is very heavy. Good day." I hung up and sent the email. It was the second cut, aimed not at Xiang's reputation, but at his professional foundation. I didn't need to scream that he was a thief. I only needed to prove that he was a shoddy craftsman. For an artist, that is a more painful death sentence. I looked out the window. On the building opposite, a giant LED screen was showing an advertisement for Xiang Jade. Xiang's face appeared, confident and radiant, next to the phoenix. Then suddenly, the screen flickered. The news ticker at the bottom began to update. Xiang Jade, Shay, stock, plummets 15% following shocking incident at auction. I felt no joy. I only felt a sense of balance being restored. It was like placing a lopsided block of jade on a turntable. At first it wobbles violently, but if you are patient, it eventually finds its center of gravity. Xiang's empire was beginning to wobble, and I would be here, patiently waiting until it came to a rest. The media storm hit faster than I had anticipated. The next morning, every newspaper, from the cheapest tabloids to the most respected financial journals, featured the image of the shattered jade on their front page. They called me the mysterious vandal, the 100 million yuan madman, the ghost of the jade world. Pundits were brought on television to analyze my actions from psychological, sociological, and even feng shui perspectives. They said a lot, but none of them said the truth. They didn't have to. I had planted a seed, and I trusted the soil I had chosen. Han Wei's article was published at midday. It wasn't sensational. It was dry and filled with technical jargon. Its headline was modest: "A technical perspective on Phoenix Reborn. Expert points to microstructural fissure." The article quoted an old professor of ancient jade appraisal from Peking University, who had reviewed my analysis. Theoretically, he said, this fissure is invisible to the naked eye and does not affect the piece's structural integrity. But it reveals something crucial. The artisan used a high-speed, laser-guided drill in the final stages, likely to save time. This is a modern technique, but it creates a micro-vibration that alters the jade's crystal structure at that point. A true master would never do this. They would use hand tools, even if it took months, to ensure absolute purity. This fissure, it is like a signature of impatience. The article never used the word stolen. It didn't need to. It had driven a knife straight into the heart of the Aixiang legend. It said that the hand of God was, in fact, the hand of a man in a hurry. That afternoon, Aixiang held a press conference. I watched it on a live broadcast in my hotel room. He walked out, trying to appear calm, but the tension was visible in his clenched jaw and slightly swollen eyes. His wife, Mei Ling, a beautiful woman whose face was carefully maintained to conceal all true emotion, sat beside him, her hand on his in a gesture of rehearsed support. "Ladies and gentlemen," Aixiang began, his voice straining for strength. "What happened last night was a despicable act of vandalism, committed by someone who is likely mentally unwell. As for the baseless rumors in the press, that is a blatant slander. Phoenix Reborn is perfect. I, Aixiang, and the entire team at Xiang Jade have always prioritized quality and purity." A reporter, likely one of Han Wei's colleagues, raised a hand. "Mr. Xiang, can you then explain why you use the laser drilling technique, a technique many traditional artisans consider a shortcut?" Xiang's confidence faltered for a second. "It is not a shortcut. It is innovation. We are living in the 21st century. Art must evolve. It must combine tradition with technology. Those who cling to the past will be left behind." He had made a mistake. He had turned the debate from a technical issue into a battle between old and new, tradition and modernity. And in the Asian art world, where reverence for heritage is profound, that was a battle he could not win. Immediately after the press conference, my lawyer's phone began to ring. Major collectors, those who had bought Aixiang's works in the past, began requesting reappraisals of their pieces. They no longer trusted his word. They trusted the word of an old professor and a technical analysis. The seed of doubt had sprouted. That evening I received another call. This time, it was Mei Ling. "Mr. Lao Lin," she said, her voice sweet but with a hidden sharpness. "I don't know what happened between you and my husband in the past, but you can't do this. You are destroying him." "Madam," I replied, "I am not destroying anyone. I am merely holding up a mirror. If the reflection is ugly, that is not the mirror's fault. He has worked so hard. He is a genius. Genius without roots is like a beautiful tree that cannot withstand the wind. Your husband chose to build his house on sand, Miss Mei Ling. The tide is now coming in. What do you want? Money? We can pay you." A sad smile touched my lips. They still thought everything could be bought. "What I want, you do not have to give. I wish you a good evening." I hung up. I knew this was only the beginning. The first crack had appeared on the polished surface of the Xiang Jade Empire, and I knew that with enough force, applied in the right place, a single small crack could bring down a mountain. That force was the truth. An empire does not fall in a day. It rots from within, like a wooden pillar eaten by termites. My job was simply to find the termites and shine a little light on them. After Aixiang's disastrous press conference, I instructed my lawyer, a cautious, chess-playing man named Mr. Wang, to begin the second phase of the plan, Mr. Wang Dideries. Wang did not send threatening letters. He sent invitations for tea. The first person to be invited was Mr. Chan, Xiang Jade's largest investor, a Hong Kong tycoon known for his cold calculations. They met in a quiet tea house. Mr. Wang didn't talk about Aixiang. He talked about Jade. He brought a file with him, not of incriminating evidence, but of market research. Inside were the customs records for the raw jade that Xiang Jade had imported from Myanmar over the last 3 years. Alongside them was a mineralogical analysis of those jade batches, conducted by an independent lab in Switzerland. The results showed that over 40% of the jade declared as grade A, untreated was in fact grade B jade, which had been bleached and polymer impregnated to enhance its color and clarity. A common trick to cut costs, but a fatal deception in the high-end market. Mr. Wang simply said, "Mr. Chan, I am only a lawyer, not an expert in gemstones. But as an advisor to a client looking to invest in this sector, these numbers give me pause. I was wondering what your esteemed opinion might be." Mr. Chan said nothing. He simply reviewed the documents, his face impassive. But after that tea session, he called his chief financial officer. 2 days later, Xiang Jade received an official notice. The Chan Corporation would be conducting a comprehensive internal audit of all company operations. In the business world, that is a polite way of saying we no longer trust you. The first domino had fallen. The other investors, hearing of Mr. Chan's audit, began to act as well. They didn't want to be the last ones on a sinking ship. The single thread I had gently pulled was now unraveling the entire tapestry. Xiang was no longer facing an old man. He was facing an army of men in suits, men far more ruthless than I, because their ruthlessness was not born of pain, but of numbers on a balance sheet. Xiang tried to fight back. He appeared on financial programs, talking about misunderstandings and unscrupulous competitors, but his voice had lost its confidence. He looked tired. The legend of the hand of God was tarnished. Now, he was just a businessman in trouble. Meanwhile, I began receiving anonymous emails. They came from carvers, from small suppliers who had once worked for Xiang. They told similar stories, of being squeezed on prices, of having their ideas stolen, of being threatened when they demanded fair payment. They had remained silent out of fear of Xiang Jade's power, but now that the great beast was wounded, the smaller animals began to find their courage. I forwarded all those emails to Han Wei. I didn't ask her to publish them. I only said, "These are voices. A good journalist will know what to do with them." I knew that I was not just destroying Xiang. I was destroying the system he had created, a system based on external glamour and internal rot. It was like working on a block of jade. Sometimes, to save the pure core, you must be willing to carve away a great deal of the outer shell, no matter how beautiful it may seem. On Friday evening, my doorbell rang. Through the security monitor, I saw A. Shang. He was alone, without his wife or assistant. He looked pathetic. The Shanghai drizzle had soaked his expensive suit, making it cling to his frame. He was no longer the young god of the auction night. He was just a man standing in the rain. I hesitated for a second. The weak part of me wanted to open the door, offer him a towel and a cup of hot tea, just as I had done whenever he caught a cold in the old workshop. But I did not. The treatment was not yet complete. Opening the door now would be like taking a piece out of the kiln before it was fully fired. It would only ruin everything. I turned off the monitor and went back to my desk. Outside, the bell continued to ring, a desperate and persistent sound. I closed my eyes, and in my mind, the ringing of the bell blended with the sound of the jade polishing machine from long ago, a sound of perseverance, of a painful but necessary process to create something of true value. The doorbell finally stopped. I thought he had left. But a moment later, the hotel phone in my room rang. It was the front desk. "Mr. Lin, there is a guest named Xiang in the lobby. He says he will not leave until he sees you." Silence was no longer an option. Sometimes, for a stone to reveal its nature, you must confront it directly. Tell him to go to the tea house on the corner opposite. 10 minutes. I put on my coarse cotton jacket over my suit. It was more than a habit. It was a reminder. A reminder of who I was and where I came from. The tea house was small and warm, an oasis of tranquility in a city that never slept. The scent of sandalwood and oolong tea hung in the air. I chose a table in the deepest corner, where the light was dim. Xiang entered, bringing the chill and dampness of the night with him. He had tried to compose himself, but exhaustion and desperation were etched into every line of his face. He sat down opposite me, without ordering tea. We sat in silence, with only the sound of the rain pattering against the window pane. "Master," he said first, his voice hoarse, "are you satisfied now?" "This is not about satisfaction, Xiang," I replied, my voice calm. "Anger is a sudden fire. It burns everything, and then dies out. I am not fire. I am water. Water flows slowly, but it can wear away stone." He gave a bitter laugh. "Water? You are more like a tsunami. You have destroyed everything. My stock, my investors, my reputation, everything. I destroyed nothing. I only showed everyone the cracks that were already there. It was your own greed and haste that created them. You built a mansion with flawed jewels. I simply pointed out the nature of those jewels. What did I do wrong? He shouted, his voice breaking. I just wanted to succeed. I wanted to escape that dusty workshop, to have the world recognize my talent. You gave me talent, but you wanted to lock me in the past. I gave you skill, not talent, I corrected him. Talent is a gift from heaven. But I also tried to teach you virtue. Virtue is humility. It is knowing that you are merely a tool for the stone's beauty to reveal itself. You came to believe you were greater than the stone. That is arrogance. And arrogance is the greatest crack of all. He bowed his head, running his hands through his wet hair. He looked like a lost child. So what do you want now? I'll give you money. I'll make a public apology. Whatever you want, I'll do it. I looked deep into his eyes. I saw no remorse. I only saw the fear of a gambler trying to negotiate his way out of a losing hand. You still don't understand, I said softly. I don't need your money. And I don't need your apology. An apology cannot mend a broken piece of jade. It can only polish the fragments. I poured a cup of tea and pushed it towards him. The steam rose, carrying a gentle fragrance. What I want, I continued, is for you to answer one question. Not for me, but for yourself. In the past 15 years, after all the auctions, the applause, the glamorous parties, was there ever a moment when you looked at a piece you had made and felt peace in your soul? Or did you only feel the anxiety of a man hiding a secret? He didn't answer. He just stared into the teacup, at his own distorted reflection on the water's surface. His silence was the answer. You sold that piece for fame, a xiang, I concluded. And that is a debt that no amount of money can repay. It is a debt you owe to yourself. My plan was not to destroy you. It was to force you to face that debt. I stood up. Drink your tea. It's cold outside. I turned and walked away, leaving him alone with the truth and the cooling tea. The confrontation was over. The next stage, the stage of choice, was about to begin. And that choice had to be his. I could only show him the two paths. The path of total collapse, or the path of a painful rebirth, like the phoenix he had tried to copy. The final blow did not come from the press or the investors. It came from a place Ah Xiang never expected, the bank. During the years he built his empire, A Xiang had borrowed enormous sums of money to expand his operations, acquire smaller workshops, and invest in marketing. Those loans were secured against the value of the Xiang Jade Company itself. When the company was at its peak, it was a smart strategy. But when the stock value plummeted and investors pulled out, those loans became a noose tightening around his neck. And the one holding the end of that noose was me. For years I had been quietly buying up Xiang Jade's debt from various banks and financial institutions through a trust company in Singapore. To them, these were just routine transactions. They had no idea they were selling weapons to a man preparing for a war. I was now a Xiang's largest creditor. I had the right to call in all the loans for immediate repayment, a demand I knew he could not possibly meet. Mr. Wang sent the notice on my behalf. There was no negotiation, no extension, just a cold demand, pay up, or hand over the collateral. 2 days later, we met at Mr. Wang's office. This time, A Xiang was accompanied by his own lawyer. He looked 10 years older. The arrogance was completely gone, replaced by the hollow emptiness of a man who had been cornered. This is a hostile act, A Xiang's lawyer said, trying to maintain a professional facade. We will fight this in court. Mr. Wang simply smiled. Be my guest. But while the court processes your case, the banks will freeze all of Xiang Jade's assets. The workshops will be shut down. The workers will be unemployed. And your client will become a public villain. Compared to signing a few papers and walking away quietly, I think the choice is rather clear. A Xiang looked at me, his eyes no longer filled with hatred, but with a profound sense of bewilderment. Why? He asked, his voice almost a plea. Why go this far? I have already lost everything. You have not lost everything, I said. You still have your hands, and you still have the chance to start over. That is what you stole from me 15 years ago. Not the design, but the chance. I pushed a stack of papers towards him. Sign it, A Xiang, end this farce. He stared at the paper, at the words Agreement for the Full Transfer of Shares and Assets of Xiang Jade Company Limited. His hand trembled as he picked up the pen. He signed his name, the characters scrawled, no longer the confident, flowing script of before. It was the signature of a man signing his own obituary. After all the formalities were complete, I said to him, "Come with me." I didn't take him back to his glamorous office. I drove him out of the Shanghai city center, towards the old industrial districts on the outskirts. We stopped in front of a rusted workshop, its metal shutter door long unoiled. "Where is this?" Xiang asked. "This was one of the first workshops you acquired when you were starting out," I said. "I kept it." I opened the door. The metal screamed in protest. Inside, the vast space was empty and covered in dust. The polishing and cutting machines lay silent under tarps. Light filtered through the grimy windows, painting long streaks on the concrete floor. The air was thick with the smell of neglect. Xiang stepped inside, looking around. This was a part of the past he had tried to bury, a past when he was still a craftsman, not a businessman. "Why did you bring me here?" he asked, his voice lost. "To mock me?" "No," I said, my voice echoing in the empty space. "I brought you home." I walked to a corner of the workshop and pulled back a tarp. Underneath was an old stone polishing bench, the most basic kind, and a wooden stool. It was a stark contrast to the modern CNC machines in his other workshops. "I had my people clear out all the other workshops," I said. "All the machinery and equipment will be sold to pay back the investors and the craftsmen you treated unfairly. But I kept this place. And I kept this bench." I looked him straight in the eye. "Because this is where you will work." The confusion on Xiang's face turned to disbelief, then to anger. He thought this was the final humiliation, a cruel joke. He did not yet understand that this was not a punishment. It was a gift. "Work here?" Xiang let out a dry, mirthless laugh. "Are you joking? After taking everything from me, now you want me to be a common laborer in this abandoned shack?" "I don't want you to be a common laborer," I said, my voice even. "I want you to remember how to be a true craftsman." I walked over to a wooden crate in the corner and opened the lid. Inside were dozens of raw stones, rough, shapeless, with dull colors. They were the kind of stones that large workshops would discard, the kind used for apprentices to practice on. I took one out and placed it on the polishing bench. "This is your choice, Xiang. Option 1. You can take what little you have left in your pocket, disappear from Shanghai, and live a life of anonymity and shame. No one will stop you." I paused, letting the silence emphasize the weight of that option. "Option 2, I continued. You can stay here, at this very bench, and start over. Not as Xiang, the Jade Master, but as an apprentice. You will polish these stones, polish them until they are smooth. You will not be paid a salary. Everything you produce will be sold. That money, along with the money from the sale of Xiang Jade's assets, will be used to pay back the people you deceived." "This island, this is slavery," he roared, his face flushing. "You want to make me your slave." "No," I said. "Slavery is when you work for someone else. Here, you will be working for yourself. You will be paying your own debts. Not the monetary debt to the banks, I have already taken care of that. But the debt of honor to the people who trusted you, and the debt of conscience to the very craft that sustained you." I looked at him, my gaze devoid of pity or triumph. Only truth. "You spent 15 years building a name. Now you have the chance to rebuild a man. This work will not bring you money, nor will it bring you fame. But it might bring you something you lost a long time ago, peace of mind." He was silent, breathing heavily. The internal struggle was plain on his face. On one side was his wounded pride, the ego of a deposed king. On the other was a fragile glimmer of hope, a way out of the swamp of lies he had created. "How long will I have to work here?" he asked, his voice softer now. "Until all the debts are paid. Or until you truly understand why I am making you do this. Whichever comes first." I placed my hand on the raw stone on the bench. "This is the first stone. The choice is yours, Xiang. Think carefully. I will be back tomorrow morning." I turned and walked out of the workshop, leaving him alone in the vast, silent space, with only himself, the old polishing bench, and the inanimate stone. That stone, like his life now, held infinite possibilities. It could remain a worthless rock forever. Or, through a painful and patient process of grinding and polishing, it could become something else entirely. That night I could not sleep. I wasn't sure which path he would choose. Men, when cornered, can become dangerous, or they can find a strength they never knew they had. I had gambled on the latter. It was a huge wager, not with money, but with faith. Faith in something I had once seen in the 18-year-old boy, a spark of goodness, buried under a thick layer of ambition. I could only hope that the spark had not been completely extinguished. The next morning, when I arrived at the workshop, I was prepared for either outcome. The place could be empty, and I would never see Xiang again. Or he could be there, but with a hostile attitude, waiting to vent his anger on me. But what I saw was different. A Xiang was there. He was sitting on the wooden stool, his back to the door. He was wearing the work clothes I had left for him, which looked baggy on a frame accustomed to designer suits. He said nothing. He was simply working. The grinding machine whirred, a steady, monotonous sound. Water splashed everywhere, mixing with stone dust to form a gray sludge that clung to his hands and face. He was grinding the raw stone I had left. His movements were stiff and clumsy, lacking the grace of the hand of God. These were the movements of someone relearning the very basics. I stood at the door for a long time, just watching. He didn't notice my presence, or perhaps he didn't care. He was completely focused on the work, on the interaction between the grinding wheel and the surface of the stone. That focus was not passion. It was like the focus of a prisoner breaking rocks, a soulless task but the only way to make time pass. I stepped inside, my shoes echoing on the concrete floor. He flinched and turned off the machine. The sudden silence made the space feel suffocating. "Your hands are too tense," I said, not as a criticism, but as an observation. "Let the weight of the stone guide you. Don't try to control it." He didn't reply. He just looked down at his own hands. They were red and swollen, bleeding in a few places. The hands that were once insured for millions of dollars now looked no different from those of a construction worker. "I brought breakfast," I said, placing a thermal container on a nearby table. Inside was plain congee and some pickled vegetables, a working man's meal. He looked at the container, then back at me, his eyes full of suspicion. "Why?" "You need to eat to work," I replied simply. From that day on, a silent routine formed between us. Every morning, I brought breakfast. Every evening, I came to check on his work. I did not teach. I did not command. I just observed. Occasionally, I would offer a brief technical comment. "This corner is still rough. You're generating too much heat. You'll crack the stone. Listen to the sound. The stone will tell you when it is ready." A Xiang rarely answered. He just worked sullenly. The first few weeks were a battle between him and the stones, and more so, a battle with himself. Many times I saw him angrily throw a stone against the wall, roaring in frustration. The pride of a master could not accept the clumsiness of an apprentice. But he did not give up. Each time he stumbled, he would silently pick up the stone and start again. Gradually, a change began to occur. A subtle, almost imperceptible change. His movements became less rigid. He began to feel the rhythm of the work. The sound of the grinding machine was no longer a torturous noise. It became a monotonous but familiar song. His hands became calloused, but they also grew steadier. One evening I arrived to find he was not grinding. He was just sitting there, holding a stone that had been polished smooth in his palm, turning it over and over in the light. He wasn't looking at it as a product. He was looking at it as if trying to find something inside. "It has a beautiful grain," he said, his voice soft, as if speaking to himself, like a flowing river. It was the first time in weeks he had spoken about a stone with something that resembled appreciation. I said nothing. I just quietly placed another stone on his bench. This one was harder, with more impurities, requiring greater patience and skill to handle. It was my next test for him. As I turned to leave, I heard him say, "Thank you for the breakfast." I stopped for a second, then continued walking without looking back. I didn't want him to see the rare smile that had just formed on my lips. The polishing process was working, not just on the stone, but on the craftsman as well. 6 months passed like a subterranean river, flowing slowly but with great power. The outside world had all but forgotten a Xiang. The name Xiang Jade was just a memory, a cautionary tale told at business parties. The debts were gradually being paid. The truth had done its work. In the dusty workshop, time was measured differently. It wasn't measured in days or weeks, but in the number of polished stones. A Xiang had polished hundreds of them. From rough, ugly rocks, they became smooth, gleaming pebbles, ready for other craftsmen to continue the work. He did not create masterpieces. He created foundations. The change in him was no longer subtle. It was tangible. He was thinner, his skin tanned, but his eyes no longer held confusion or anger. Instead, there was a calmness, a tranquility I had never seen in him, not even in his most glorious days. He had learned to work without applause, to find value in the simplest of tasks. One morning I came to the workshop as usual, but instead of the container of congee, I brought something else. It was a sandalwood box, lined with yellow silk. A Xiang was cleaning the polishing machine. Seeing me, he just nodded in greeting. He had grown accustomed to my presence. treating it as a part of the workshop, like the wooden stool or the smell of stone dust. I placed the box on his workbench. He looked at the box, then at me, a hint of confusion in his eyes. "What is this?" "Open it," I said. He hesitated for a moment, then carefully lifted the lid. Inside, on the yellow silk lining, lay a block of jade. It wasn't large, just big enough to fit in his palm, but it was a perfect block of jade, a piece of heady and mutton fat jade, white as suet, without a single flaw, without a single cloud. This was the kind of jade that any master carver dreamed of touching, the kind one could spend a lifetime searching for. It was completely raw, untouched by any blade. Liang held his breath. He reached out his hand, but then pulled it back, as if afraid of soiling the jade. "All the debts," I said, "have been paid." He looked up at me, his eyes wide. "So, I am free?" "You have always been free, Liang. Before, you were chained by your own ambition. Now, those chains are gone." He looked back down at the jade, then at his own calloused hands. "So, what do you want me to do with this?" That was the question I had been waiting for. The Liang of 6 months ago would have asked, "How much is this worth?" But now he asked about purpose, about meaning. I smiled. "That is not a question you should ask me. It is a question you must ask the jade itself. Listen to it. Spend time with it. It will tell you what it wants to become." I placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture I had not made in 15 years. "I have taught you everything I know about skill. For the past 6 months, these stones have taught you humility. The rest you must find on your own. The path of a craftsman is a lonely one." I turned and slowly walked out of the workshop. I didn't need to stay anymore. My lessons were over. His journey, the real journey, was just beginning. When I reached the door, I heard him call out, "Master!" I stopped, but did not turn back. "Thank you." His voice was sincere, without a trace of falsehood. I did not reply. I just gave a slight nod to myself and stepped out into the morning sun. The old workshop was no longer a prison. It had become a place of rebirth. Not the glamorous rebirth of the fake phoenix, but the silent rebirth of an artist's soul. I did not know what Liang would carve from that block of jade. Perhaps it would be a masterpiece even greater than Phoenix Reborn. Perhaps he would carve nothing at all, keeping it only as a reminder. It no longer mattered. What mattered was that I knew that whatever he created, it would have no more cracks. Of course. Here is the continuation of The Crack in the Jade, from chapter 11 to chapter 15, written in English. In the days that followed, I did not return to the workshop. A master's presence becomes redundant once the lesson has been imparted. The space now belonged to Liang and the block of jade. The relationship between a craftsman and his material is a sacred one, into which no third party should intrude. But I still watched from a distance. I had hired a delivery man, an honest youth, to bring lunch to the workshop every day. He didn't know who I was, only that he was to follow instructions, place the lunchbox at the door, knock 3 times, and leave without a word. In return, he would report back to me on one thing only, whether the light in the workshop was still on in the evening. For the first week, the light was always on. But when I asked the delivery boy about the sound of the grinding machine, he shook his head. "There's no sound, sir. Only silence." Liang had not touched the jade. I understood. This silence was not procrastination or fear. It was reverence. The Liang of old would have pounced on the block of jade, his ambitious mind immediately envisioning a dragon, a phoenix, something spectacular to announce his return to the world. But the Liang of today was different. He had learned the bitterest lesson: haste is the enemy of understanding. He was listening to the jade, just as I had once taught him. He was sitting for hours with it, turning it in the light, feeling its weight and coolness in his palms. He was searching for its soul, waiting for it to speak of what it wished to become. This was a wordless dialogue, a prolonged meditation. Instead of touching the precious jade, Liang began to clean the workshop. He wiped down the dusty machines, organized the tools, swept the floors. He transformed the abandoned warehouse into a space of order and focus. The act carried a deep symbolic meaning. He wasn't just cleaning a physical space. He was cleansing his own mind, preparing a sanctum where creativity could germinate. Sometimes, late at night, I would drive past on the nearby road. I never stopped. I would just look at the faint glow emanating from the window. That light was not like the brilliant neon of Shanghai. It was a warm, solitary, and steady light. It was like a candle in a temple. A month passed. Still no sound of a grinding wheel. Mr. Wang, my lawyer, called me. Mr. Lin, we've had a few offers from some smaller galleries. They heard you took over the Xiang Jade workshops. They want to commission some simple pieces. Refuse them all, I said. That workshop is not working for money now. But the maintenance costs. I will cover them. I knew that if I accepted even one commission, the pressure of the market, of deadlines, would creep back into that space. It would shatter the necessary silence. A Xiang needed to be free from the burden of creating products. He needed to relearn how to create art. The two are entirely different. One comes from the demands of others, the other from an inner calling. At the end of the first month, the delivery boy told me something new. Sir, today I saw a lot of paper inside. He has it taped all over the walls. It looks like drawings. A Xiang had not picked up a knife. He had picked up a pencil. He was not carving stone. He was sketching possibilities, exploring the jade on paper before daring to touch it in person. I nodded in satisfaction. The healing process was on the right path. He was relearning the proper sequence he had once skipped. True beauty does not lie in the final product. It lies in the very process of its conception. The silence of the jade was finally being answered, not with the sound of machinery, but with the quiet strokes of a pencil on paper. The outside world has a way of finding you, no matter how well you hide, especially when that world feels you still owe it a few unfinished stories. On a rainy afternoon in the second month, the delivery boy called me, his voice a little flustered. Sir, a woman came to the workshop today. She was in a very fancy car. She went inside. What did this woman look like? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Very beautiful, like an actress on television. Mei Ling. I hadn't thought of her. After the collapse of the Xiang Jade Empire, she had disappeared along with A Xiang. I had assumed she had chosen a different, less turbulent life. Clearly, I was mistaken. I did not go there. This was A Xiang's battle to fight. I had given him his independence, and that meant I had to trust him to face the ghosts of his past on his own. But for the rest of that afternoon, I couldn't focus on anything. I kept looking at my phone, waiting for a call, for some sign that the piece A Xiang was building had been shattered. It was late in the evening when A Xiang himself called me. It was the first time he had initiated contact. Master, he said, his voice a little tired but steady. Mei Ling came today. I know. She said the world hasn't forgotten me, that there are still people who believe in my talent. She said if I can create a new masterpiece from that block of jade, she can help me organize a solo exhibition, a spectacular comeback. I remained silent, waiting. This was the test. Mei Ling was offering him the very thing he once craved, a shortcut back to the pinnacle of glory. She was speaking the language of the old world, the language of branding, of narrative, of the comeback story. She said we could start over, as Xiang continued, his voice low, that I owe her a better life. What did you say? I asked. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the rain drumming on the tin roof of the workshop. I showed her the stones I polished for 6 months, A Xiang replied. I told her that these are my only works now. They have no names. They have no stories. They are just polished stones. I told her I owe her nothing, because a better life isn't something glamorous on the outside. It's peace on the inside. I closed my eyes. A wave of relief washed over me. My boy had truly grown up. She cried. A Xiang recounted. She said I had changed, that I was no longer the A Xiang she once loved. I told her she was right, that A Xiang died with the fake phoenix. And then, I gave her half of the meager savings I've made from selling the polished stones to other small workshops. I told her it wasn't compensation, but a farewell, so she could start a new life. A life without the ghost of Xiang Jade. That was the right thing to do, I said. Master, he hesitated. After she left, I did something. I took out the block of jade, and I made the first cut. My heart skipped a beat. You did? Yes. I don't know what it will become. I just felt that, after confronting my past, I was ready to begin something new. I only made a single cut, a straight line. A straight line. In carving, a straight line is the most difficult thing. It requires a steady hand, an unwavering mind, absolute focus. It is not the beginning of a complex shape. It is the assertion of an intent. Good, A Xiang, I said, using his name properly for the first time. Keep listening. Do not rush. Yes, master. After I hung up, I walked out onto my balcony. The rain had stopped. The Shanghai night sky was clear. The skyscrapers glittered as they always did, but tonight, for me, the brightest star was a small, warm light on the outskirts of the city. The light of a craftsman starting over, not with a masterpiece but with a single, honest cut. I did not go to the workshop immediately. The first cut is a private moment between a craftsman and his jade. My curiosity had to yield to my respect. I gave Xiang his space and time. But a week later, I could wait no longer. Late one night, when the city was deep in sleep, I drove to the workshop. I didn't go inside. I stood outside, by the dusty window where Xiang had wiped clean a small patch. Under the yellow lamplight I saw him. He wasn't working. He was sitting on the stool, his hands on his knees, just silently contemplating the block of jade on the turntable. The jade had changed. It was no longer a perfect, inanimate block. Now, on its milky white surface, there was a thin, perfectly straight groove. The cut was not deep. It was not a wound, but an opening. It did not reveal the final form of the work, but it had defined its direction, like the first brushstroke on a blank canvas that determines the composition of the entire painting. Under the light, the cut looked like a thread of shadow on a bright background, a beautiful contrast between potential and reality. I stood there for a long time, feeling the silence and concentration radiating from within. This was not the atmosphere of a factory. This was the atmosphere of a meditation hall. Xiang was no longer fighting the stone. He was in dialogue with it. That cut was his first reply in their conversation. In the following weeks, through the delivery boy, I learned that the sound of the grinding wheel had started up again. But it was not the harsh, hurried whirring of the first few months. The delivery boy described it as a very soft hum, on and off, like the sound of a bee at work. Xiang was using the smallest grinding bits, the kind used for fine details. He worked very slowly, spending hours on a tiny area. Sometimes, he would stop for days at a time, just to sit and look. He was no longer working by the clock. He was working to the rhythm of the stone. The curiosity of the art world also began to stir. A few antique dealers and curious collectors found their way to the workshop, but they were all met by a locked door. Xiang was not receiving visitors. He had built an invisible wall around himself and his work in progress. This isolation was necessary. True creation requires a pure environment, untainted by the opinions or expectations of the outside world. I respected that. I did not visit again. I only received news through the delivery boy and, occasionally, through brief phone calls from Xiang. He didn't talk about the piece. He asked highly technical questions. Master, when working on a large flat surface of Haitian jade, how do you maintain its natural warm luster without getting a glassy shine? How do you create a sharp edge without losing the soft feel of the jade? These were the questions of a high-level craftsman, someone concerned not just with form, but with the spirit of the material. I answered him carefully, not giving solutions, but suggesting ways of thinking. Think of how water flows over a pebble, I said. It erodes, but it does not take away the stone's essence. One evening he called me, his voice tinged with excitement. Master, I think I have found it. Found what? Its form. It was always there. I just had to remove the excess. He did not say what the form was, and I did not ask. I knew that when it was ready, I would see it. Until then, I would continue to wait, like a gardener waiting for a rare seed to sprout. I had planted the seed. I had watered it. The rest was up to the heavens and the seed itself, and I had a profound faith that, this time, it would grow into a sturdy tree, its roots planted deep in the soil of honesty. A year passed. Spring arrived, bringing humidity and new life to Shanghai. The plane trees on the city streets began to sprout new leaves, and Xiang, like the city, was beginning a new season. He had run out of money. The savings he had kept after giving half to Mei Ling were only enough for a minimal existence for a few months. He did not tell me. His new healthy pride would not allow it. Instead, he did something no one could have imagined. One weekend morning, at an outdoor antiques market near the Yew Garden, a crowded and bustling place, a small, simple stall appeared. No flashy sign, no uniformed staff. Just a man in blue work clothes, sitting on a stool, quietly arranging perfectly polished pebbles on a black velvet cloth. That man was Xiang. Those stones were the product of his first 6 months of labor. They were not works of art. They were simply stones, polished to perfection, highlighting their natural veins and colors. He was selling them not at the price of art objects, but at the price of a paperweight, a lucky charm. Very cheap. The news reached me through Han Wei. She had been passing through the market by chance and couldn't believe her eyes. She called me immediately. Mr. Lao Lin, she said, her voice filled with astonishment. You won't believe this. A Xiang is selling pebbles at the flea market. They are not pebbles, Miss Han. I corrected her. They are humility. Should I write an article? Fallen Jade Master. It would be a very compelling headline. No, I said firmly. If you truly respect an artist, leave him be. A real comeback does not need headlines. It needs silence. She was quiet for a long moment. I understand, sir. I won't disturb him. She kept her word. But the story of A Xiang still spread through the antique dealing community, not through the press, but by word of mouth. At first, people came out of curiosity, to see how pathetic a fallen king looked. They expected to see a drunk, a bitter man. Instead, they saw a quiet craftsman, focused on his work, treating every customer, even those who only bought a stone for a few dozen yuan, with the same courtesy and respect. And they noticed something. The stones, though simple, had an unusual beauty. They were polished perfectly. Holding them in your hand, you could feel a warmth, a smoothness, a sense of peace. People started buying them, not out of pity, but because they genuinely liked them. An old collector, who had once been a major client of Xiang Jade, came to the stall. He picked up a stone, examined it for a long time, and then said to A Xiang, "Years ago, you sold me a Pixiu for 2 million yuan. It was beautiful, but I never truly felt it. This stone costs only 200 yuan, but I can feel the heart of the craftsman in it. You have found something more precious than skill, young man." A Xiang said nothing. He only bowed his head in thanks. His small stall became a strange attraction. People came not just to buy stones. They came to see a man rebuilding his life from the fragments. They came to feel the peace that emanated from that humble stall. I never went there myself, but I knew all these stories. A Xiang didn't need to sell those stones to survive. I could have supported him. But the fact that he was doing it himself, publicly and humbly, meant more than any masterpiece. He wasn't just selling stones. He was selling his old pride and buying back the dignity of a true working man. And that was a priceless exchange. 2 years after that fateful day at the Christie's auction, I received an invitation card, handwritten on rice paper. It was not from a Xiang, but from the administration of an ancient temple on the outskirts of Suzhou. The card invited me to attend the consecration ceremony of a new sculpture, donated by an anonymous patron. I knew it was him. The temple was situated on a small hill, surrounded by a lush bamboo forest. The air was fresh and serene. There was none of the opulence of Shanghai, only the peace of a place that had witnessed centuries of change. The sculpture was placed in a side hall, a less frequented area. It was not set on a grand pedestal, but on a natural slab of rock. When I walked in, I held my breath. It was the block of Hetian jade, white as mutton fat. But it was no longer a raw block. It had been carved into the shape of a bamboo shoot, not a full-grown bamboo stalk, proudly reaching for the sky, but just a small shoot, barely emerging from the earth. The layers of the sheath were exquisitely rendered, wrapping around each other, the veins as thin as silk threads, and on the very tip, a single morning dewdrop, carved from the most translucent part of the jade. The work was incredibly simple, yet it contained an immense life force. It was a symbol of humility, of resilience, of a new beginning from the earth. There was not a single superfluous detail, not a single ostentatious display of skill. The entire piece emanated a quiet beauty, a perfect harmony between art and nature. The craftsman had not imposed his will upon the jade. He had allowed the jade to express its own essence. I stood there for a long time, unable to look away. This was not Phoenix reborn. The Phoenix was a beautiful but hollow myth. This bamboo shoot was the truth, a humble but powerful truth. An old monk walked up beside me. "What does the patron think of this work?" "It has a soul," I replied. "The man who donated this piece was here for 2 years," the monk recounted. He did not say who he was. He only asked to be allowed to stay, to do chores around the temple, and to spend a few hours each day completing this work. He said the temple bells and the silence here helped him find the peace to listen to the stone. "Where is he now?" I asked. "He left this morning, right after placing the work here. He said his task was complete. He left a letter, asking the temple to give it to a man named Lao Lin, should he come." The monk handed me an envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, with a few lines of handwriting, the script now steady and calm. "Master, I have not given this work a name. It does not need one. It's simply island. I have not signed my name to it, for it is not mine. I was merely the fortunate one who helped it emerge into the world. I have learned that a craftsman's true masterpiece is not the thing he creates. It is the man he becomes in the process of creating it. I will not be returning to Shanghai. I am going west, to the mountains where the jades are born. I want to start again from the beginning, from learning to find and understand the raw stones. Perhaps I will never create another piece again. Perhaps I will just be an anonymous jade hunter. I do not know. And for the first time in my life, I am at peace with not knowing. Your student, a Liang. I folded the letter, a serene smile on my lips. He understood. He had truly understood the virtue of jade. I looked at the bamboo shoot one last time. There was something that perhaps only I would notice. In a hidden corner at the base of the shoot, there was a tiny, minuscule scratch, looking like an accidental flaw. But I knew it was no accident. It had been made deliberately. It was in the exact position, proportionally, of the microstructural fissure on the fake phoenix from long ago. A Liang had not hidden his past. He had not tried to erase it. He had accepted it, integrated it, made that crack a part of his new work, a part of his new self. The crack was no longer a symbol of failure or deceit. It was now a reminder of imperfection, of forgiveness, and of the long journey to find oneself. I bowed before the sculpture, not as a collector, but as a master bowing to the student who had surpassed him. My legacy was not in the works I had created. It was here, in this humble bamboo shoot, and in the artist who had found his soul. I turned and walked out of the temple, towards the setting sun. This time, I did not feel alone, for I knew that somewhere, in the distant mountains, a craftsman was continuing his journey, not to conquer the world, but to merge with the eternal silence of the stone. And that, in itself, was the most magnificent rebirth of all.